After you've engaged with a narcissist for a significant period of time, they will tend to make it pretty clear that you do not measure up to their standards. And they have all sorts of different ways that they can do that. And I think that you can acknowledge that you'll find yourself backing up on your heels thinking, well, how do I explain myself to this person in such a way where I can stay in their good favor? And in this video, we're going to be talking about how that might not be a great question, because if you're constantly in a defensive posture, then it's going to bring out the worst in you. And narcissists, of course, do tend to take a very offensive style. And so you have to ask yourself the question, do you really want to engage in an ongoing offense, defense form of communication? We're going to be talking about that here. Now, before we get into this, I do want to make you aware that we have some resources for you. Right below the video, you'll see a couple of links that will get you to a couple of books. One is one of my books. It's entitled "When Pleasing You is Killing Me," and the subtitle is Setting Boundaries with the Narcissist in Your Life. And the other is by a woman named Lora, and the title of that is Ugly Love. And the subtitle there is A Survivor's Guide to Narcissistic Abuse. And I think you'll find those to be good additions to your library. And then in addition to that, if you'd like to subscribe to our channel on narcissism, then certainly we would invite you to do so, because we're going to have more videos that we're going to load up along the way. Now, let's get back to our topic here. Let me begin by telling you a little story. Now, way back, this is a few decades ago, when I was in training as a young therapist, I did a lot of work with small children. One of my professors said, Les, if you want to understand the mind of an adult, you need to work with kids, and you're going to see it all in raw form unfolding right before you. And it was very good advice. And so I learned how to work with children, and certainly got a mindset as to how they interact with the world. Well, with kids 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, you don't put them in a counseling office. You put them in a playroom, and you take what's called a non-directive approach. And by that I mean they come into your office and you don't really tell them what we're going to be doing today. You let them kind of set the pace for you, and then you begin engaging based on what they give you. And it's always fascinating to see how things play out. Well, one particular afternoon, a little boy that I had seen a few times came stomping into my playroom, and clearly he was not in a good mood. And as he stood right there in the middle of the room, he turned around and looked at me, and with this guttural tone of voice, he just says, "I hate you." Well, that wasn't exactly the way I wanted to begin my afternoon. And what I wanted to do was just try to maybe talk with him about the evils of hate. Now, you're not supposed to talk to an adult like that. But then I realized, no, that's not the path we're going to take. So I just simply made an observation. I said, well, I could tell when you came in the room today that you weren't in that great of a mood, so fill me in. What's going on? Well, in his case, he'd been outside with his friends. And Mom made him come inside and pick up his jacket, wash his hands, and jump in the car and come see me. And so my next response was, oh, so you'd like to be with your friends rather than in here with me. So what kind of stuff do you like to do with your friends? Well, he begins talking with me, and within 5 minutes, guess what happens to his hate? It begins to dissolve. Now, what happened there was he was giving me an invitation to go into a power play with him, and I didn't take the invitation. I just let him be what he was. And even if his feelings were pretty strong and pretty negative and aimed directly at me and possibly even impugning my character, it's where he was. And I didn't feel like I had to address it. I just wanted to address where he was, and I had to stand in my own confidence. Now, that's a real simple illustration, and when you're talking about a 6-year-old kid, then usually you can work your way out of that fairly well. How many times have you had the experience with that adult, though, who comes along with a lot of contempt? And they've got a real negative and difficult attitude, and they make it pretty clear that they have a low regard for you. It's like, you're meaningless to me, or you just can't seem to do anything that pleases me, or you can't do anything right. Narcissists, let's keep in mind, have that real high need for control. They want to be in the superior position. They don't have a lot of use for your feelings. They don't have much empathy, but they do have an attitude of entitlement. And so one of the most common things that we'll see as you engage with that narcissist is a lot of blaming communication, or just the indications, through criticism that you're not measuring up, there's something defective about you. In those moments, what they're doing is they're giving you an invitation to become an adversary. And basically, they're becoming offensive. And so the opposite of offensive is defensive. And so the natural inclination that you would have is to pick up the defensive mantle. Does that ever happen with people that you engage with who have that real strong, controlling, narcissistic style? Now, basically, if you break it down to what I call the covert messages, the narcissist is covertly communicating stuff like, you don't do life well, or you're making my life miserable, or I find you to be defective. Now, in those kind of moments, when you start feeling defensive, notice what your inclination is to do at a time like that. For example, you may immediately begin pleading your case. No, the reason I'm doing this is because of A, B, and C. Or it might be that you'll start asking that narcissist loaded questions. Why is it that you have to come in here and talk to me in that demeaning kind of way? Why do you have to do that to me? And of course, they're never going to answer you in a straight kind of way. Or you may flip it around to the narcissist, what I call boomerang communication. Me, I'm not the one with the problem, you're the one with the problem. Or perhaps you know that if you're in that defensive posture and you say something, then you're going to get shut down anyway, so you just go silent. And the more you stay in that defensive posture, then it's like fuel to the narcissist, because they're going to continue in their narcissism or in their offensiveness. And as a result, it's just going to create a circular kind of communication that you're not ever going to win. Now, notice when you go into the defensive posture what that really says about the interior of you. Your defensiveness is your way of saying, I'm feeling threatened in this moment by your poor opinion of me. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't really like hearing crummy things about me if somebody's being critical and harsh and all. But then the next question is, but am I threatened by that? And we're going to get to that in just a minute. Or the more you're in a defensive posture, it's like you're implying, I've got to live with your approval. I can't move too far down the road until I get you to understand. And in essence, you're handing over your personal stability to that other individual. Or perhaps your defensiveness is your way of implying, my life will be ruined if you don't show me acceptance. Or I feel powerless without your approval. And in doing so, with this defensiveness, you realize that this is just music to the narcissist's ears, because they're thinking, good, I got you going, don't I? And keeping in mind that they love to be in the superior position, they'll take that insecurity or that fear that you have on the inside, and they'll just keep running with it and try to grind you into the ground. Now, let's keep in mind that as a general rule, when you have that narcissistic approach towards relationships, it doesn't take much for that person to go into the bully mode. And they're going to respond in a way that just keeps them in a position that says, you are so inadequate, you're so beneath me, and I'm going to prove to you how no good you are. So there are a few questions that I'd like for you to try to come to terms with as you engage with that narcissistic person that can communicate contempt, that can communicate disdain toward you, and then put you in that defensive posture. The first question is, why am I expending so much energy defending myself? Is my character that rotten? Do I have to defend myself that strong? I have a very simple question that I like to ask, and that is, why defend something that needs no defense? And so why are you putting so much energy into trying to defend yourself to someone who very naturally has a poor opinion of you anyway? Or a second question that I want you to ask of yourself is, can I manage my life without this person's assistance or approval? In other words, am I helpless if this person remains contrary to me? And I'm hoping the answer is, well, I can manage life. And if this person goes along with you, that would be nice. That'll be a bonus. But if they don't, I'm going to be okay. Which then can prompt another question, and that is this narcissistic, offensive person in charge of my feelings of self-worth? Because like I say, it's almost as though whenever the narcissist goes into that high control mode, you're thinking, well, their vote is the final vote. And if I don't get a good vote regarding my value and my worth, I guess I'm sunk. Now, let's underscore defensiveness implies fear. And you want to ask yourself, when that narcissist comes on in the offensive way and I begin responding in a defensive pattern, is it necessary for me to go straight to my fear place? Now, there's an antidote that will counteract that fearfulness, and that's the characteristic of trust. And you can't really trust the narcissist because, I'm not going to hand over my sense of well-being to that person. But my question to you is, do you trust you? And going back to that little boy that comes in and says, I hate you, my thinking was, I'm a pretty nice person, at least most of the time, and I have good intentions here, and if you hang out with me, I think you'll find over time that I do have your best interest, so just stick with me and we're going to be okay. And I trusted myself. Now, the narcissist may never come to a positive conclusion about who you are and what your worth is, but I'm hoping that you can come to some positive conclusions about who you are and what your worth is. So you might ask another series of questions, and that is, am I competent? Well, if the answer is yes, and the narcissist is saying, I don't think so, well, but what do you think? Are you competent? Do you make sense? Do you approach life with a sense of responsibility or ethics? Are you a reliable person? When you know that you can answer those kind of questions to the affirmative, then the next question is, do I really have to get that other person's approval? And so when the narcissist comes along and puts up their fist and says, come on, let's fight, do you really need to go into that arena? Let's keep in mind that behind the scenes of that offensive narcissistic approach toward you is a hurt little child. And they're coming at you with no logic leading the way. They're coming at you with a hard agenda that's not going to be in your favor. And so recognize that you're dealing with somebody who's troubled and who doesn't really want to get at truth. And so my question for you is, can you learn your own truth about you to the extent that you can say to yourself, well, if this other person expresses a low opinion of me, that's where they are. But the good news is, I trust who I am. Anchor down in self-trust, and that becomes your ticket to stay out of that offense-defense form of interaction that's going to get you absolutely nowhere good.